Hello, everyone. Welcome to the School of Self-Mastery. I have Reina from reinaandco.com. I'm super excited to have you here, Reina, to share you with my audience and share something that I think is going to be super valuable for them, regardless of what stage they're at in business. And this is something I think that, it's your creation of this methodology that we're going to teach them. But I find that, I think this is something that I've done, but not done it as well as you have, which is why I love that you've kind of put this nice bow around it so that we can teach it to my audience and to my listeners. So tell everyone just a little bit about who Reina is and what Reina and Co does.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Adrienne.
Yeah.
So I run Reina & Co. It's a life and business success coaching practice, and I serve clients who are creative and who are right-brained and heart-centered. And so it's a lot of clients who have a lot of ideas in their heads, but they don't know how to do all of the things. And so we help them make sure that they pick the most important thing so that they can become the go-to expert in their industry. And one of the things that I was noticing at the beginning of when I was starting my business was that I was alone on my own little island. And I felt, I don't know if you felt this way, when you came into the industry, you didn't know any of the rules. And so I came in with no textbook, no rules or guidelines about how to do this thing called business online. And I was just trying things out. And the thing that felt most natural to me was connecting with people. And I think there's a lot of talk about what connections look like online and what community looks like online and how to use Facebook groups. And I think your episode with Michelle was really, really incredible to talk about how to leverage those communities. But I took it a step further, and my friend from grad school called me social glue. And she kept saying that, Reina, you're social glue. You really love to connect people to resources, to new opportunities and cool things that are happening across the city. And that's just how I was built. And so I created this kind of by accident, this method that I call the social glue method, which is a new way of thinking about how you create connections and being intentional about connections being first rather than selling being first.
Oh my gosh, I love that your friend called you social glue, and that's how this kind of naming came about. I think that that's a super interesting story because I always want to know the origin, right? How did this start? Or did you just sit and write out names on a paper? I think it's so much better that someone called you that, and it's so true. That is your personality, and anyone that knows you will start to see that as they get to know you. And I've, gotten to know you over the past 6 months, year. And I think it's very obvious that you are social glue. And that's one of your core values is connecting people, and not just connecting people for the sake of connecting people, but connecting the right people, which is something that one of my friends, Selena Sue, also does really, really well. And I just always found it really nice when people are more thoughtful with their connections, and Selena is that way and you are that way. And so I think, having the social glue method so that people can learn from this is really cool. So I'm just interested in, how did you even get started? What was your life like before online business?
So I started out as a social worker. So I was in graduate school doing social work training and worked in inner city Baltimore, working in foster care systems and doing trauma care. And it was really intense stuff. And if anyone has worked in an inner city kind of situation, they know, how much there's secondary trauma when you're dealing with trauma. So I realized pretty early on that I was going to need to do some self-care, find a way to, I'm a creative person naturally, but I'm not artistic by any means. So I was how do I do the creative thing? So where a normal person probably would have taken an art class or go to one of those wine and paint classes, I started my own wedding planning business because that's normal. And
was this before or after you planned your own wedding?
It was it started before. I think I finally filed my LLC paperwork after I got married, but just because I was planning my wedding and stuff.
Yeah. That's so interesting.
And I was always living this 2-track life, here's my professional social work life, and then here's my side hustle of the pretty, very, flowery styled shoot type of audience. And it never felt like it connected. But the one side, the social work side, was always about like, I want to help people. I want to make the world a better place. I want to make an impact. And I didn't really know what that meant. And then on the flowery side, the wedding planning side, it was all about, I want to do logistics and I want to do pretty. And I realized early on is that I didn't really love that business, but what I loved about it was business and the people that were creative. And so now I've been able to combine the two. And when I left that last position in the social work world, I did some coaching and I got coach trained, and now I do coaching for creative entrepreneurs.
I love it. I love how you've molded those things. And I'm always like trying to figure out from people like how they can incorporate more of their background, or like how they can use those previous expertises to understand this is why you had to be back there, like in those roles to be able to get you here. And one of my favorite shows is called The Wire. Have you ever seen The Wire?
Everyone thinks that the Wire is very much Baltimore. I think
that's my only reference to Baltimore. It's like,
I mean, I think it makes the city look really bad. There's really nice parts. There are
like, it's not all like that.
Yeah, it's not all like that. So, and the people are pretty nice. So,
but it's a great show for anyone who hasn't watched The Wire. I've watched that season, I've watched all of those seasons multiple times. It's actually one of those shows that I like to go back and like rewatch from the beginning. It's that good. But that's just a random side note. So give everyone a little, maybe just an overview of what the social glue method is and how they can like apply it to their business. And then we'll kind of break it down so that they can start using it in their business.
Yeah. So the social glue is real. I call it the social glue method. And it's really about this intentional connections with people, so that you get to know somebody in business as a human. And I know that for a lot of people, when we post in Facebook groups, it's very 2-dimensional. The intent of the social glue method is to get to know them in a 3D form. I know that, just doing Skype is still 2D, but it's a little bit more in real life, right? And so I really encourage people to get off of the interwebs and do more of the face-to-face, get to know them in person, get to know about their kids, all kinds of stuff like I would know about church, and like just stuff about the person that you're talking to, and being able to reference that later. In addition to that, like personal side, I think you need to learn about their business, what they're struggling with, what they're challenged by, how you can support them, so that you can get to know them as like a whole person in business. And when you get to do that, I think it makes it so much easier to refer them. It's easier to, say, hey, this would be the great person for this opportunity that somebody else is thinking about. So it's kind of like expanding your web of networking, like in a really natural way.
Yeah. And I love that because it's easy to like stay hidden, I think, in the group, like if you're in Facebook groups or if you're on Instagram or in these social media platforms, it's still, even if you're doing like Snapchat or something like a live stream, honestly, like it's still a one-way typically interaction, or like a very surfacey interaction, until you take it to that one-on-one or small group level. And I think you're speaking specifically to one-on-one, right? Like reaching out to these people one-on-one and having like a call like we are doing right now, where we can see each other's faces. You can see the color of my walls. I can see your office. Like there's even something I think intimate about that aspect, because, it helps me get to know you. Like my dogs will probably walk into the scene, like all of those things that we wouldn't get just by posting on social media or responding to someone on social media. But tell me who this is for, or is this for everyone at every stage of business? Because I think that what happens, and maybe we're going to get to this, but I think what happens is like, okay, I'm just starting my business. I'm going to be like, I hear this a lot from people, right? Like, I don't have time to do that. And I'm like, you don't have time not to do that, right? Like that's what my response would be. But a lot of people just want to get out there and start selling, right? Like we talked about in the beginning, how this is kind of like the alternative to that.
Yeah.
So who is this for? Is this for everyone in online business at every stage?
I think you would argue that it is, and I think so too. And my reasoning for that is, if you are feeling alone and isolated on your own island and you feel like you have to press and sell and sell and sell, this is the easy way. And I say easy because it's, for me, it's much easier to just have a chat about me and what I do and what I love to do, rather than being like, hey, do you want to buy this thing? And like, no one likes that. Like, it's all about the like, know, and trust factor. And we're not trying to be conniving. We're not trying to be, I don't know, like transactional in any way, but it's really about growing these relationships so that somebody can authentically endorse you as a human being. And so, yeah, I do really recommend people do it at any level in their business. Last year, in my first year of business, I did about 75 of these on top of my sales calls. So I was on a lot of calls last year. And I think it was the way that people started to know me as the go-to person for this business, for coaching creatives. People tagged me in Facebook groups just after having one chat with them, because they were willing to vouch for me as a person, even if they weren't willing to vouch for me as like a coach yet. And so I think that makes all the difference, to have the recognition of somebody, and to get to, I think everyone wants to feel validated. Everyone wants to feel seen. And when you can do that on a call, that other person is going to reciprocate if they're a good person.
Yeah. And I think, and I heard something this weekend when I was at Podcast Movement. Oh, I want to find it. Got my notes here. But it was about your honest story demands reciprocation, is what Shannon Kaysen, which he's the host of Homemade Stories podcast. I'll put a link to the show note in the show notes to that. And I think it's so true. Like, when we have these vulnerable or honest conversations, or just like very connected conversations, like it will reciprocate, right? Like, and he was speaking specifically to sharing an honest story, where like, if I share an honest story about my alcoholic, not me drinking, although I did do my fair share of drinking, like, which is probably due to that, alcoholic mother, and like all the things that I went through as a child, and like things, that were traumatizing or whatever. Like, I think that, whenever I do share that story, there is honest reciprocation that happens, right? And he was saying the same thing because he was addicted to gambling, right? And we're going off on a tangent here, which we'll come back. And he said, every time I tell that story about my gambling addiction, like, it is reciprocated with people that come up to me and tell me how they were addicted, or how someone they know is addicted. And thank you so much for sharing this. And he's like, by sharing my truth, people reciprocate their own. And it kind of demands that without even asking. And I think the same thing is true even when we're not like sharing these deep, dark stories, although you do have the opportunity to really get to know someone on a call like this, where you wouldn't necessarily do so in a large Facebook group or on Instagram, because you just don't have the time or the space to get there.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's more than just, the typical social media kind of banter that goes on.
Yes.
Like, yay, and then it's kind of done. It's really about like digging deeper, getting to know somebody. And like, some of those people you're just not going to jive with, and that's okay. But finding the people that you do jive with, that makes it so that you have accountability buddies. That means that you have people you can text, or just go see and have like a meeting with or retreat with. And so it's really about connecting those bridges, like building bridges amongst people. And like you said, with Shannon's stories, it's that like, when you are vulnerable with somebody, they can be vulnerable with you too, and you create that space together. So I think when you show up together, you're able to do that. And it's not like, what can you do for me? But like, what can we do for each other?
Yeah, I love that. And, you just hearing that you did 75 of those calls last year, in addition to the clients that you were seeing, in addition to the sales conversations that you were having when people reached out to you to actually work with you, in addition to all the other meetings and things that we have to do in life in general. I think it says a lot about you and the success. I always say sex when I say success. Freudian slip, right? And the success that you have created and will continue to create. And I was listening to an interview with Elena Cardone just before this, she is Grant Cardone's wife. And she was talking about how, basically whatever we think we need to do to like achieve the result, we probably need to do like 10x of that, right? And their whole model is the 10x formula. And I think that that's true. Sometimes we think, oh, I can do this much. And then when things don't happen as quickly or don't happen the way that we want, we quit, versus saying, oh, maybe I just need to do a little bit more. And so doing the 75 calls, that might feel overwhelming to people, intimidating to people, but it's not like you did them all in 1 week, right? So we don't have to like set that bar. But what is the mindset that someone has to have to go into this methodology, to go into their business and say, I'm going to use Social Glue. I'm going to really dive deep and try to connect with people on this deeper level without, expecting anything in return necessarily. These are not just calls with potential clients. And I'm going to ask you that next, like, who do we want to have these calls with? But what is the mindset first that we need to like go into this method with?
Well, I think you already said some of it, is that you're not trying to sell people on the thing immediately. And so go in with the idea that you're trying to make friends. You're trying to get to know some of the people that are frequenting some of the Facebook groups that you love, that you see online. You see their names blowing up places, and just get to connect with them. So I do this with people who are, or who have been peers with me, and people who I admire and are at a higher level than me. And also even people who are maybe a little bit behind where I am in business. And it's so funny to see like where people are right now as compared to where we were, 6 months ago. And kind of to go back to your original question, is the mindset of, how many can I do this week in order to just reach out to somebody? How can I benefit something else? And I think you have to have the mindset of, this is not a short-term strategy. This is not, it's going to get you a sale like that.
Yeah.
It is over the course of a year, this person is going to refer me, people just to talk to get to know. I think so many of my cool opportunities have come from this method. I've gotten speaking gigs from it. I have gotten clients from it. I have gotten, here, will you do a webinar with me that's been attended by 1,200 people because of this? And that's incredible, because my list sizes does not indicate that that should be a thing for me. But I think it's really cool when you invest in others, they will reciprocate in other ways.
Although it has grown your list size by doing these things, by like creating these opportunities for yourself without any idea in the beginning of what it was going to create for you, right? So like sometimes we have this attachment when we get onto that call, or when we make time in our schedule to have those calls, we're attached to, what is the outcome? What is this doing for me? Like I hear this from people, right? Like, well, why should I continue to go do these calls when I'm not really sure what it's going to get me? And like you hit it spot on, which is what I wanted to like really make sure we imparted on people, is like, this is a long-term strategy, right? But you're growing yourself as a person along the way. You're making these really powerful connections. Like you're connecting with people that, may or may not refer you, but how valuable is that to just know another person, right? And instead of like treating this business as transactional, like you're really going into it knowing like, I want a long-term business. And so I do want these connections, and there is no like expectation of what's going to come out of it, because you can't possibly know, and like, I think that's kind of the beauty of it, is who knows. But I also think, like, I read your blog post on this, which I do want to include in the show notes. And I know you have a freebie for everyone that will include a link to, which you might cover some of these questions. But I know that you have like specific questions that you suggest, or that you tell people like, here's some of the things that I've asked on these calls. And I thought they were really helpful, especially the last one. I thought was really, really good in terms of like, how do you envision, and correct me if it's wrong, but like, how do you envision us collaborating together?
Yeah. So first of all, I think I always try to get people on the phone or on Skype. That's like the method of my Social Glue networking. And I call them coffee dates. Sometimes it's just water dates.
So when you reach out, let's dive into this. When you reach out to someone, do they necessarily know you? Do you kind of just email them or message them and say, hey, I'm Reina, like, this is what I do. I would love to just chat with you. Do you ever like think that they think you're trying to sell them or anything? Like, does that ever happen?
Sometimes that happens, but typically it's in Facebook groups. And so if I'm interacting with somebody and I'm like, hey, I kind of like you, like, let's be friends. Can we jump on a call together? And I make it really clear that I'm not trying to sell them anything. I just want to get to know them, want to get to know their business and understand like who their audience is so that I can refer them better. So if you go in with a how can I serve you kind of conversation opener, it's a lot easier. And in the beginning, how I got those 75 calls was I said to myself, I'm going to reach out to 5 people every day. I'm sorry, 5 people every week. Okay. Yeah, every week. And so that meant sometimes I had 2 calls, sometimes I had 5 calls. It really just depended on the week. So it kind of snowballs from there.
Totally. And then do you ask those people like, hey, is there anyone else you know that I should know?
Yeah, exactly. That's one of the questions that I have. I have a loose agenda. I think it's part of the blog post, but because if I don't have that, I feel like really klutzy and don't know what I'm talking about. And
then it kind of can take a lot longer than what it needs to be.
I mean, it doesn't have to be like a meeting, but.
Right. How long do you typically chat or leave in your schedule for these?
Yeah, so I typically schedule them for half an hour, but I leave a little bit of a buffer because sometimes you just love somebody and you want to be on the phone for 2 hours. And so obviously you can't be on the phone with everyone for 2 hours, but at the beginning I was doing like hour calls, and I think recently they're like either half hour or 45 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. I'm already like thinking, because I do this a lot. I obviously haven't called it social glue, but I do this a lot. And especially like when I'm in a program or a mastermind, like I'm really intentional about taking personal responsibility to like reach out to those people and connect on a one-on-one basis. So I have a full schedule, but I think that anyone who really wants to make more connections and grow their business, like this is such a valuable thing to add to your week, right? And so I'm already like, how many can I schedule this week, right? Like I'm already like thinking about my schedule the way I have it now, and like maybe just blocking off, like here's my social glue time, right? Yeah. Every week, whether it's 1 hour or 2 hours, et cetera, because you can always make time to do that and you never know what it's going to turn into. So
totally.
I think that that's such good advice for people to, I think people get discouraged and like disappointed when they're in these groups and they do feel like they're on an island. They do feel like they're doing this alone, or they feel like, nothing's working, right? Maybe it's just that you're not connecting enough on a real personal level with people, because I know, Reina, you mentioned that like now people will refer you, they'll tag you because they actually know you, even if they've never been your client or coached with you, right? They can vouch for you as a person. So I think that that's so important. Has anyone ever said no to you?
Oh yeah, there are plenty of people who are like, I don't have time for that. I'm like, okay, that's fine. And then it's funny because, as I've like risen is such a weird thing, but like, as I've gained a little bit more visibility or credibility, people have wanted to connect with me again. And so that's interesting. I always think of Eminem when I think of that, but or like any celebrity who's made it and like has somebody who's told them no, right? But not that I'm like them, but you know what I mean.
Kind of like Eminem, yeah.
I'm totally not, but that's just a quote that I think of. Anyway, I think something that you hit on earlier is kind of interesting, and I know that you're an introvert too, so this might resonate for you, but I've intentionally reached out to introverts who I try to acknowledge when they do comment and say, hey, I see you, I see what you're doing, and I want to connect with you, and let's see if we can collaborate, or let's see if we can chat. And it's not about like who's further in business or anything like that, but how can we serve each other, and how can we kind of be friends? Because I think introverts think that they have a disadvantage in these groups. And I know you talk a lot about this, but you don't. Like, you just have to show up. And so if it feels scary to you, once you connect with somebody in real life, it makes it easier to show up more. And so if I can be that person to encourage them to show up, and I can show them that like you bring a lot of value, then that I feel so, my cup is so full when I can do that for people. So how can you be that for others? As you see success in your business, how can you bring other people up with you?
I love that. And I think, anyone who knows you knows like how big your heart is and how genuine you are when you have these conversations, and that you're seeing people in those groups that would benefit from, and you would benefit too, right? From talking to them. I think it's always going to be mutual.
Yeah. It's not like I'm trying to say that they're a charity case or anything. No. It's just like, I see them and I really want to acknowledge that I see that you're showing up, and it's really cool. So how can I get to know you? Like, can we be friends?
Yeah, I love that. I think that that's, I mean, I like talking about this introvert thing because I think I'm like one of the weirdest introverts. Like I'm still trying to understand like my own introvertedness because like getting on this call with you or getting on a call like this with someone else, this actually gives me energy. Like I love connecting with people in these small groups, these small
That's the
spaces.
true textbook definition of
Textbook version. But I honestly like, it's easy for me to hide. It's easy for me not to do that, like to not even do this call because it like, when I think about it, it feels heavy sometimes like, oh, I got to go do this or whatever sometimes. But then as soon as I'm on it, I'm like, I love talking to you. Right. It's kind of like the plans that I make to like go to parties. Well, this is the reverse, right? Like I'll be like, yeah, I want to go to that party. And then like by the time the party comes, I'm like, oh God, I wish I didn't.
I'd said no. Yeah.
To that party. Yeah. But I think that this, this will work for everyone and just not attaching to the outcome. But do you expect results when you do this? Like, I guess I kind of want to talk about that so that people like going into it can kind of understand what they want to get out of it. Like, should they be super intentional with, like you said, you have kind of an agenda. Should they be super intentional with like, there's got to be a result here. Otherwise, why am I getting on the phone with 75 people?
Yeah. So for me, my strategy is long-term. So I want to find out who I do like. I want to find out who I want to, be in a tribe with. I want to figure out who are going to be like cheerleaders for me and how I can be cheerleaders for them. And so in that way, there is a strategy, but it's not like you have to give me something for this call to be valid or like worth my time. So in the over the course of those 75 calls, I probably got to really know like a third of those people, and I text them on the regular, or I'm just checking in with them, or I've collaborated with them in some way, shape, or form. And so for me, those collaborations have been one of the best tools in growing my business, because when you share an audience, when you can, do something for their audience and they can do something for your audience, it really can, I think it just elevates both of you, and it shows your expertise in different ways. And so that's my strategy. I mean, it might not be the most, strategic strategy, but like,
no, I think it is. But I think that people do have to have that long-term mindset. And I think a lot of people don't. They want these quick wins like, oh, well, Reina, if that's not going to get me a client tomorrow, I don't have time to do it. And it's like, well, then you probably don't have time to be in business, right? Because a lot of these things are longer term. You need to, take the time to build a relationship, whether that's with a potential client or with a peer or with a mentor. Like, it's not something that like, you reach out to me and tomorrow I'm going to ask you to marry me, right? Like it's kind of like the relationship I like to make it analogous with, because it's just true, right? Like we have to like work up to that. We have to get to know each other better. But when the time is right, it's like, now that I know you, I'm going to reach out to that person. And actually this is like very similar to, and I want to talk about two things here, because it's very similar to how I talk about connecting with publicity people and press, because even if you're pitched, like if you pitch Business Insider and they say no, like that's fine, but now they at least know and have you as a reference for future articles. Like, oh, maybe it's not a fit for this one, but in the future you're on their radar now, and they could think back like, oh, I remember there was someone who emailed us recently about and I actually did this with O Magazine. I have a connection there now, and I pitched them something that they were looking for. They were asking for it, and I didn't meet the right age qualification. They wanted someone who was 35 or over, and I said, I'm only 30, but here's the story from my point of view. If this works for you, or if you're looking for anything in the future, I would love to, I'd love for you to keep me in mind, because I'd be happy to share more about this story. And it was about relationships and money and things like that. And so I was like, I would be perfect for this, right? But I'm not 35, but keep me in mind for the next time. And I think that that's the same thing, like in when you're getting media attention or building relationships with press, it doesn't have to be a short-term strategy, because those people need stuff in the future. So I think that it's kind of the same thing. Like it's not always going to be a quick win, but they will know when to refer to you. So I think that that's huge.
Yeah, no, actually, I had this happen recently to me. A couple months ago, I was listening to Tara Gentile's interview of Natalie McNeil, and on her podcast, and I was just like, I listened to Natalie as she was talking about how she connected with the press at the beginning. And I just loved her mindset about it is a relationship. And it is all about connection. And I jive so much with that, reaching out to them on Twitter, of all places, and getting to know them. And so I started really reading people's stuff, following editors, and just trying to keep a relationship with them, reposting, retweeting, that's what it's called, all of that. And recently I've actually had a couple connections come up through bigger business publications, just jumped on the phone with people. I just had an interview with somebody who has a national business podcast and stuff like that. And those connections have come from just reaching out and creating relationships. And it seems like it should be harder, but I have to remember that these people are human, and I have to practice what I'm preaching with my audience as well. So yeah, it matters what you do with the press.
Yeah, it totally. And actually, I had someone on, her name is Mary Beth Storjahan.
Love her.
Oh yeah, you know Mary Beth. And that's exactly what she did on Twitter, was like, she did not look for like clients in her business. She was looking to connect with editors and press, and she built those relationships really strongly on Twitter. And if you go to Mary Beth's website, workyourwealth.com, you will see all the places that she has been featured. And it is extraordinary how much press she's gotten for her business. And then, like, this is what I call the authority advance method, where you build the authority and then people come to you, right? Like, she didn't need to look for clients first. So obviously she had maybe cash flow, or she was making cash in her other business. And then when she was building her own, she spent the time to really connect with the press on Twitter. And
that's another long-term strategy.
Oh,
that's definitely not a
long-term strategy, but it works, And so I think that ultimately it comes down to this relationship building. And the other point I wanted to make was just to, agree with you on the collaborations, that like when you collaborate with people, sometimes there's this fear of, oh, we have the same audience, or even like we sell the same things, etc. So, or the same types of things, even though they're not the same things, because different people are going to be attracted to you. You actually grow much faster together than if you were to not share audiences. And at Podcast Movement this past week, Dan Miller of 48 Days, which, great book and very public mentor, and Aaron Walker, same thing. He's been on EO Fire like 3 times, and he has a business called View from the Top, who they're also friends with people like Michael Hyatt, and they've been in a mastermind together for like the past 20 years. And their strategy,
that's incredible.
Their strategy has always been to support each other. And they grew their own audiences much faster by sharing each other's work with their audiences. So they're always cross-pollinating and lifting each other up, and having this supportive group of men who shares each other's work and talks about, oh, how great he is, because they truly think that they are great, like they're supporting them because they believe in it and they believe in each other. And I think that that is so key, like whether it's within a mastermind or just by building these connections with the social glue method, like really lifting up each other and building those collaborations will help you both grow. So I think that's just so huge.
I think too, when you start thinking about some of those strategies that are like, you can make $100,000 today kind of thing that you and I don't agree with. When that's your mindset and that's what you want right now, it's hard to do stuff like social glue. It's hard to do stuff like what Mary Beth does with the press, because that is really focused on your long-term sustainable growth, business development stuff, right? And so when we can really shift our focus and say, this is going to pay off in the long term, because it doesn't have to be years and years from now, but it can be just like a month from now. For me, I didn't have a website when I started. So that was me networking. That was me like putting out a shingle, right? Doing social glue was my method. And so I was 2 months after I put my website out, finally, my practice was booked, like fully booked. And
before the website even came out.
2 months after it.
Oh, okay. 2 months after the website came. Yeah.
Yeah. Within like before 6 month, my 6 month mark in my business. And
That's
so
insane. Yeah.
that's crazy. That's not supposed to happen. But I think it does when you trust something like this, and you're really intentional about who you want to get to know, because people will turn around and say, yes, I like you as a human, and I will, share you out to people. And so it's kind of like that building up of others mentality. And if you can kind of pay into that system, then you'll reap the rewards tenfold.
I love it. So we're going to give them a freebie where they can get more of the social glue method, correct?
Yes.
Perfect. So they can go to reinaandco.com/social glue. I'll put it in the show notes as well. What are they going to get in there? Is that going to be like a breakdown of how they can apply this?
Yeah, so there's, I put the agenda in there. So if you want to follow these questions, these are some of the key questions that I use so that my brain doesn't blank.
Yeah.
Some of the questions around when to decide if you're going to do a collaboration, how you can really support each other, and what that looks like for your future relationship with them.
Beautiful.
And follow-up too. I think I included follow-up in there.
Oh yes, because we really want to follow up with these people. That's like, don't leave them hanging after this call, right? Like, do you follow up with everyone or just the people that you really feel like you made a strong connection with?
So the one solid question I ask every single time is, how can I support you? And whatever the answer to that is, I do follow up on, just because that's what you should do as a person. So sometimes it's like, can you post this on social media, or will you, come in and comment on a couple of things, or support me in this way? And for me, that question has been such a game changer in my business, because one, for me, it's to be able to articulate what I need and to get support in. Women have a really hard time asking for support. So that's a practice for myself, but also to help others articulate what they need and how I can be of service to them. So it's kind of like a two-parter. And then yes, about 3 months after, if there's like a solid action item, I do put it in my calendar to follow up.
Perfect. I love it. Let's talk a little bit about self-mastery, since that's what I like to talk about too. So tell me, how do you define success?
Success for me is being able to have my family that I really love to hang out with, and to be able to take off Wednesday afternoons and go to the pool with my son. It's also
today.
Yeah.
Well, it's today when we're recording, not when it's airing.
Not when it goes live. Yeah. So I'll like schedule some of that stuff out and make sure that I can go to the gym in the morning and stuff like that. And also to be able to go to Japan where my family lives, and like, be able to take my son there for a month, and my business can be flexible in doing that. It's also to be able to supplement our household income and to do the things that we want to do that, one like income can't do. And so I really want to be able to do all the fun things that our family deserves to do.
Yeah, a lot of freedom, right?
For sure. And another thing too is we're building a school with Pencils of Promise. And so that's like my huge heart. I really love to be able to do that and give back to the world. It's like the social worker part of me.
Yes.
So yeah, that's definite success for me to be able to continue to give back. And I know that that's your heart too.
Yes. I have something coming soon. It's going to be called Good Business. Good businesses do good. And so it's all about earning more and giving more. And Reina, I'm going to ask you to be one of our sponsors of that program, where we feature the way that you give back, which is such a powerful thing. I can't wait to see the school that you're currently building. It's so cool. Tell me a little bit about like a couple habits that you have that help you create more of that success and freedom, or sanity, so to speak, in your life.
Yeah, so first and foremost, my laptop and phone, certain nights of the week go on timeout. So I can't touch them after a certain point in the night. It's not every single night, because sometimes I do have to work in the evening, but it's like declared, like tonight is timeout day. And so they'll go into like a corner. That's one. That's one thing. Another thing is, if I don't schedule my workouts, they don't happen. Just like doctor's appointments. It's like one of those things that I don't like to do this way, but if I don't schedule it, it doesn't happen. And so that gets scheduled. And then another thing too is I create space in my calendar for white space. So just being able to reflect as a CEO of my business rather than being reactive all of the time. So how can I be a better leader to my community? How can I be a better leader to my team? And how are we doing? just kind of getting a gauge for what's going on in the business.
I love that. How often does white space happen typically?
It's every other week. So the first Friday of every month, we do finances, we as in me, myself and the CEO and I, right?
You and the CFO, right?
Yes, the CFO, CEO get together. The second and fourth Fridays are the white space days, and then the third Friday is kind of whatever you want.
Whatever needs to be done, right?
Whatever needs to be done. So sometimes they take off.
Yeah, I love that. I love like creating that white space, because that's where we create the space to grow, right? Is when we can reflect on like what's working, what's not working, what do we need more of, what do we need less of, how do I envision this vision going, and really giving yourself the time and the space to be proactive versus reactive.
Totally. Yeah.
In your business. All right. Reina, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so fun.
This was fun. Everyone, you can watch us too. If you're listening to the podcast, you can come and see what Reina looks like and what I look like. If you go to adriendorison.com/Reina, you will see the page of me and Reina, and you'll also have a link to the social glue method. You can go to reinaandco.com/social glue. If you're listening, it's REINA and co.com/social glue.
Yep.
And we will be back again next week for normal episodes, but also for Summer Fridays. This has been really fun just to have valuable conversations with people that I think I know better than the normal people that I interview, which is, I think that we have a more, I don't know if it's fun or connected conversation, but I love it. So thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.